Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. So today I'm talking about another experience that I had on my own personal spiritual journey, but it's a story with a lesson, and so I will segue my story into a lesson that I've learnt on power and the meaning of power and how that is related to the spiritual path. So a few years ago, I learnt about the true meaning of power, and I did it after praying to the god Hanuman. At the end of 2012, I travelled to India with my now wife and her family, because she had family over there, and we travelled to a number of different cities, one of which was Shimla, a city at the foot of the Himalayas, a very beautiful place. We travelled there and our tour guide was taking us around and asked if we would like to see the Temple of Hanuman. The Temple of Hanuman was a temple located at the top of one of the mountains of Shimla, and it could be identified by the towering orange statue of Hanuman that rose up from that peak well above the trees. It could be seen from a great distance. And so we travelled to the Temple of Hanuman. Now Hanuman is an important figure in Hindu religion. He's considered by many people as the god of power and the granting of power. So we went to see the Temple of Hanuman. I remember that there were a lot of monkeys around and they were very aggressive, and we had to carry sticks because there was a threat of the monkeys approaching and attacking us and possibly passing on rabies. So that was a bit difficult. And we were all looking at the temple, and I decided that I wanted to go in for a closer look, also to pay my respects to Hanuman, since it was his temple that we were visiting. But in order to do so, it was necessary to walk past to run the gauntlet, as it were, to walk past all of these monkeys that were hanging out the front of the temple without my stick. So I had to have a bit of faith that I wasn't going to be attacked as I walked to the temple entrance. But I made it in and I went to receive my blessing, and then I went around the back of the temple to pray. And the way that prayer to Hanuman took place in this particular temple was by placing one's hands on the wall. There was an orange wall at the back, and you sort of place your hands on it like that, and then you pray in that fashion. And I was very involved in student politics at the time that I visited this temple, and so I was interested in understanding the phenomenon of power better. And of course, visiting Hanuman's temple was a golden opportunity to gain insight into power. So I put my hands on the wall and I prayed, and I asked Hanuman to help me to understand true power. And then sometime later we were in Delhi again, and we visited a bookshop. And in this particular bookshop, I found a book called The Art of Power. And I was very drawn to it, and I knew that this was the book that would answer my question. So I bought it, and then I read it. And I wasn't disappointed. The Art of Power is written by a man called Thich Nhat Hanh, who sadly passed away relatively recently. But he's a spiritual guru that I greatly admire. You know, there's a lot of spiritual teachers who use spirituality as a form of escapism, who teach spirituality as a means to try and escape and ignore the problems of the material world. But Thich Nhat Hanh was one of those few wise teachers who understood the necessity of, on the one hand, pursuing a path towards spiritual enlightenment and spiritual wisdom, and on the other hand also standing up against political injustice and trying to change the world so that it better reflected a fair and decent society. And he could see how those two pursuits were related to each other and reinforced each other. And so because of that, he's become one of my great role models. He taught people how to meditate, and he also protested against the Vietnam War. That is the sort of spiritual teacher that I aspire to be like. So I already had great respect for this man, and so of course I was willing to read his book and hear what he had to say. And Thich Nhat Hanh breaks down, in his book The Art of Power, Thich Nhat Hanh breaks down the question of power like this. Most people view power as having more material possessions, having more status, being able to exercise force over other people. But that's not what true power is. All of that is an illusory form of power, and it's dependent on external circumstances, and it's a power that can never be satisfied because you always need more of it, because the nature of reality is that things pass away and circumstances change, and so you can never truly have the control that you want by trying to control the world around you. And Thich Nhat Hanh contrasts that kind of power, worldly power, with what he says is true power, which is personal power, power that you cultivate within. And what is that power? It is the power of your consciousness, the power of your awareness, and it is a power that is unleashed when you become identified with that consciousness, when you liberate that consciousness, instead of being drawn away by all of the various attachments of the world. When you reside back in that consciousness and you use that consciousness to control your own internal world rather than trying to control the external world. When you haven't got your own house in order, when you haven't controlled your own impulses and your own mind. To have that control over your own internal world is what Thich Nhat Hanh calls true power. And so when we can be unaffected by the world, when we can just do things in life and do what we want to do in life from that deep-seated place of our consciousness, from that deep-seated place of our volition, using our volition clearly and strongly to find the path that we're meant to be on and to follow the tendencies that we have that we're meant to follow without interference from the outside world or without relying on the outside world to validate us. That is true power. That is truly exercising the will to power. Another way of understanding true power is by understanding the difference between power over on the one hand and power to on the other. So the first kind of power, power over, is power that is of the world. It is the power that the ruling establishment exercises. It is the power which is dependent upon structures and institutions and brute force, enforcing a situation where one person or a group of people have all of the control and everybody else is given no control. And so somebody has power at the expense of other people and can dominate other people by inspiring fear in them. and they can get everything that they want, or they can try at least, by exercising this power and taking things from other people. And that is how our society is set up. And that is an example of the power over. That is worldly authority. But there's a different kind of power, and that's the power too. This is the inner power, the personal power, the power of the consciousness that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about. The power too is the power, it's something that's innate in you, and it's expressed as a force, as a kind of creative force, but it doesn't come at the expense of other people. So if you have great speaking ability that you exercise, that's the power too. It's the power to speak. If you are able to create inspiring artworks, you have the power to create art. If you have the power to meditate and still the mind and be centered and see things clearly without discrimination, without prejudice, that is power too. And if you have the ability to persevere in the most difficult circumstances, so that even if you feel utterly suffocated by all the difficulties of life, you still have the ability to pick yourself up and to still have faith that things are going to get better, and to keep pushing forward until they do, until you've improved your life in some way. That is power too. And that is true power. That is power that comes from within, that is not dependent on the world. It is only dependent on your own will, your own awareness. And that is true power. And so if you're looking for power in life and you're trying to empower yourself by taking away opportunities from other people, or by relying on institutions or laws to silence or censor other people, or keep other people in a state of poverty or disenfranchisement, then you're not really exercising true power at all. In fact, fundamentally, you're weak. Because if all of those structures, if all of those institutions were taken away and the playing field was leveled, do you think people who rely on power over would really have enough power to stand their ground and to thrive in life? Just look at the example of the Fire Festival a few years ago. This is a very interesting case study in what happens when people who have been brought up in the world of power over are put in a situation where all of the source of that power is taken away, and how well they fare. Not to give any spoilers, but they don't fare very well. But if you have the power too, then even when everything on earth is taken away from you, you can still remain centered, you can still remain grounded, and you can still have the inner strength to do what you are meant to do in life. And that is a way that you can overcome powerlessness, and it's also a way that you can overcome powerlessness that doesn't interfere with other people, that doesn't come at the expense of other people. And really, if we reject the premise of power over, if we reject the premise that certain people should be allowed to use institutions to disempower other people, then what we replace that with needs to be different to that. And the only way to do that is by cultivating that inner power, which is the only true power.